Right now, at this very moment, there is a lie sitting quietly somewhere in your life. And no, I am not saying that to scare you. I am not trying to make you paranoid or anxious or suspicious of everyone around you. I am saying it because it is simply, statistically, almost certainly true. Somewhere in your circle, in your recent conversations, in your memory of the last few weeks, someone told you something that was not what it appeared to be. And the reason you did not catch it has nothing to do with how smart you are. It has nothing to do with how careful or how experienced or how emotionally aware you think you are. The reason you missed it is because the person who told that lie understands something about how your mind works that nobody ever sat you down and explained. And honestly, that is not your fault, not even a little bit. But here's what I need you to do right now. Before we go any further, I need you to think of the last conversation you had where something felt just slightly off. Maybe it was a friend explaining why they could not make it to dinner. Maybe it was someone at work giving you a reason that sounded perfectly fine on the surface but left a weird little feeling in your chest. Maybe it was someone you love, someone you trust deeply, looking you straight in the eyes and saying something that your gut quietly, almost invisibly, questioned. Do you have that moment? Can you feel it? Good. Hold on to that. Because by the time we finish this journey together, you are going to understand exactly what your gut was trying to tell you. And more importantly, you are going to have the tools and the awareness to listen to it clearly, confidently, and compassionately for the rest of your life. Now let me share something with you that genuinely changed how I see every single human interaction. Something so simple it almost sounds too obvious, but once you truly absorb it, it rearranges everything. The human mind is built to trust first and question second, not the other way around. From the moment you are born, your brain is wired to accept what it is told before it even considers doubting it. Think about that for a second. Every friendship you have ever built, every business deal you have ever made, every promise you have ever accepted, every "I love you" you have ever believed, all of it rests on this one invisible foundation. The assumption that the person in front of you is telling the truth. And you know what? That assumption is beautiful. It really is. Without it, we could not build anything. No families, no communities, no partnerships, no nations. Trust is the invisible architecture of human civilization. It is the thing that allows us to cooperate with strangers, to open our hearts to people we have just met, to believe that the world is fundamentally a place where people mean what they say. But here is the other side of that coin, and this is where it gets uncomfortable. That same beautiful trust, that same default to believing, is exactly what makes deception so devastatingly effective. The greatest lies that have ever been told in human history were not the ones that sounded suspicious. They were not the ones that made people narrow their eyes and lean back in their chairs. The greatest lies were the ones that sounded completely, perfectly, absolutely reasonable. They were wrapped in confidence. They were filled with believable little details. They were delivered with just the right amount of emotion by people that nobody, not a single soul, ever imagined would be capable of dishonesty. Has that ever happened to you? Have you ever been completely blindsided by someone you trusted? Have you ever found out that something you believed for months or even years was never true? and felt that sickening drop in your stomach where the ground just disappears beneath your feet? If you have, you already know what I am talking about. And if you have not, I genuinely hope this helps make sure you never have to experience that feeling unprepared. Here is a number that should bother you. Research in behavioral psychology has shown consistently across decades of studies that the average human being is barely better than a coin flip at detecting lies. Let that land for a moment. When someone sits across from you and lies directly to your face, you have roughly a 50-50 chance of catching it. 50-50. That is not skill. That is a guess. That is standing at a crossroads with no map and no compass and hoping you walk the right direction. And that raises a question that, once you really sit with it, changes the way you look at your entire history. How many stories have you accepted as true that were never true at all? How many apologies were performances? How many excuses were constructions? How many explanations that shaped your decisions, your emotions, your sense of reality were quietly, invisibly false? I am not asking you that to make you feel bad. I am asking because awareness is the first step. And the beautiful thing, the genuinely hopeful thing, is that deception is not invisible. Not really. A liar can control their words. With enough practice, they can control their story, their tone, their facial expression, even the way they breathe. But controlling every single signal, that is nearly impossible, because beneath every lie, hidden underneath the carefully chosen words and the rehearsed emotions, there are patterns. Patterns in language, patterns in behavior, patterns in the body, patterns so consistent and so reliable that once you learn to recognize them, you start seeing them everywhere. Not because everyone is lying to you, but because the world suddenly becomes more legible, more honest, more clear. And that is what we are going to do together over the next 13 chapters. We are going to walk through the secrets that professional interrogators know, that behavioral analysts use, that psychologists have documented, and that skilled investigators rely on every single day. We are going to look at deception from the inside out. We are going to understand why liars construct stories instead of recalling memories. We are going to learn why certain questions make dishonest people deeply uncomfortable. We are going to discover why emotion is so often weaponized, why silence is terrifying to someone with something to hide, and why some people eventually start believing their own fabrications. But here is what matters most to me, and I want you to hear this clearly before we begin. The goal of everything you are about to learn is not to make you suspicious. It is not to turn you into someone who doubts every word out of every person's mouth. The world has enough cynicism. What it needs, what you need, is something much more powerful than suspicion. You need clarity, the ability to see what is really happening without losing your warmth, your empathy, or your belief that most people, most of the time, are genuinely doing their best. Because here's the truth. The goal is not to become someone who trusts no one. The goal is to become someone who is extraordinarily difficult to deceive, and those are two very, very different things. Ready? Let us begin. And the first secret starts with something so simple it might surprise you. When someone is telling you the truth, they are remembering. When someone is lying to you, they are building. And the difference between those two processes, once you see it, You will never be able to unsee it again. Secret 1. Liars give you a performance, not a memory. There is a fundamental difference between how a truthful person communicates and how a dishonest person communicates, and it does not live in what they say. It lives in how the whole thing is assembled. A truthful person reaches into their memory. A dishonest person reaches into their imagination. And that difference, invisible to someone who does not know what to listen for, becomes incredibly clear once you do. Let me walk you through this because it is genuinely fascinating. When you ask someone who is being honest to tell you about something that happened, they go back into their memory and they pull. And what comes out is messy. It is imperfect. It is nonlinear. They might start in the middle of the story because that is the part that hit them hardest emotionally. They might pause halfway through a sentence because a detail just surfaced that they had completely forgotten about. They will correct themselves mid-thought. Wait, actually, I think it was Wednesday, not Thursday. Or, I cannot remember exactly what she said, but the feeling was something like this. They might laugh at how disorganized their own recollection is. Has that ever happened to you? Have you ever tried to describe something real that happened to you and found yourself jumping around, backtracking, correcting yourself, saying, "No, wait, that is not right," as your brain pulled up fragments in no particular order? Of course you have, because that is how genuine memory works. It is not a movie playing on a screen. It is more like opening a drawer full of photographs that are not in any album. They come out randomly, associated by feeling rather than chronology, connected by emotion rather than logic. Now here is what a liar does, and this is where it gets really interesting. A liar tells you a story, and I mean that in the most literal structural sense. Stories have a shape. They have a beginning, a middle, and an end. They move smoothly from one event to the next. Every piece connects logically to the piece before it. There are no awkward gaps, no moments of confusion, no sudden corrections. The whole thing flows like it was written in advance. And if you think about it, that is exactly what happened. It was written in advance. Maybe not on paper, but in the person's mind. They sat with it. They rehearsed it. They arranged the details in an order that would sound natural and convincing. And when they deliver it to you, it comes out polished, seamless, complete. And here is the thing that should make your ears perk up. That level of smoothness, that level of narrative perfection, that is not how memory works. That is how preparation works. Let me give you an example you can probably relate to. Imagine you ask a friend what they did last Saturday night. A truthful friend might say something like, "Oh, Saturday. Let me think. I think I stayed in, actually. No, wait, that was Friday. Saturday I went to that new place downtown with Marcus, the one near the bookshop. Or was it near the pharmacy? Honestly, I do not remember exactly, but we had these amazing tacos. And then, oh yeah, we ran into your friend Dana on the way out. That was random." See how that feels? Disjointed, imperfect, full of genuine little corrections and side notes that go nowhere important. That is the texture of a real memory being accessed in real time. Now imagine a different version. Saturday night, I went to a restaurant downtown with a friend. We got there around 8, had dinner, talked for a couple hours, and then I headed home around 10:30. Clean, smooth, perfectly chronological. Nothing out of place, nothing surprising, and nothing that actually sounds like a person reaching into a real memory. That sounds like a person delivering a prepared summary. Do you see the difference? Can you feel it? Now here is where it gets even more useful. Pay attention to the details a person gives you because the type of detail matters enormously. When a truthful person recalls an event, the details they offer are organic. They come up because they are genuinely stored in memory alongside the main event, and they often seem random or irrelevant. The truthful person might remember that there was a dog outside the restaurant, or that a specific song was playing when they walked in, or that their chair wobbled. These details are not important to the story. They are just what the brain happened to record. When a dishonest person constructs an account, the details they provide are functional. They are there to serve the story. They make the account feel more real and more specific, but they are never truly random. They are always relevant, always plausible, always doing a job. The waiter had a blue apron. We sat by the window near the back. I remember because the bill was exactly $42. These details sound convincing. They feel specific, but they have a manufactured quality because they were chosen, not recalled. Professional interrogators and behavioral analysts have a name for this. They call it the difference between organic detail and constructed detail. And once you start listening for it, you will hear it everywhere. Not because everyone is lying, but because when someone is lying, this difference is one of the most consistent and reliable signals they produce. And there is one more piece to this that I want you to take with you. When a truthful person gets hit with an unexpected question, a question that approaches the event from an angle they were not expecting, they search their memory. You can actually see it happen. There is a pause. Their eyes might drift. They go quiet for a second while their brain digs through the real files. And sometimes they find an answer, and sometimes they say, "You know what? I honestly do not remember that part." When a dishonest person gets hit with that same kind of unexpected question, something different happens. They do not search their memory because there is no memory to search. Instead, they recalibrate. They look into their construction and try to figure out how to extend it in a direction they did not plan for. And that recalibration, if you watch carefully, looks different from genuine recall. There is a tiny flash of something that looks like calculation rather than searching. A subtle shift in pace. A slight increase in vague language. And then the answer comes, and it is usually either an extension of the rehearsed narrative or a smooth dodge disguised as a direct response. This is the foundational insight. Once you understand that a liar is performing a story rather than reporting a memory, you start listening differently. You stop just hearing the words, and you start noticing the architecture underneath them. You start asking yourself, does this feel like someone reaching into a genuine experience? Or does this feel like someone reading from a script they wrote themselves? And once you have that question in your mind, everything that comes next, every secret we're about to explore, builds on it. Because the next secret lives in the physical dimension of the very same performance. And trust me, your body already knows things your conscious mind has been ignoring. Secret 2. The body speaks louder than words ever could. Here is something I want you to sit with for a moment, because it is one of those facts that, once you truly absorb it, quietly reshapes the way you experience every face-to-face conversation you will ever have again. The human body has been communicating for millions of years. Millions. Long before we had language, long before we had words or grammar or the ability to construct a sentence, our ancestors were reading each other through the body, through the face, through posture, through the way someone moved toward them or away from them, through the tension in a jaw or the softening around the eyes. These signals are ancient, they are hardwired, they are automatic, and they are extraordinarily, almost impossibly, difficult to fully control. Now think about what that means for someone who is trying to deceive you. A liar can rehearse their words. They can practice their story in the mirror. They can decide in advance what details to include, what tone of voice to use, what emotions to display. With enough preparation, they can make their verbal performance nearly flawless. But the body? The body is running on a completely different operating system, one that is older, faster, and far less obedient to conscious instruction. And that creates a problem for the liar that they can never fully solve. Because while their mouth is delivering the carefully crafted story, their body is quietly, persistently, stubbornly telling you the truth. Have you ever been in a conversation where the words sounded right, but something about the person just felt wrong? Where they were saying all the correct things, giving you all the reassurances you asked for, but something in your chest tightened anyway? Something that you could not name, could not point to, could not logically explain, but that sat there like a small stone you could not swallow? That feeling, that was your ancient brain picking up on signals that your conscious mind had not yet processed. That was millions of years of evolutionary pattern recognition telling you that the words and the body were not matching. And if you are like most people, you probably talked yourself out of it. You probably told yourself you were overthinking it, being paranoid, reading too much into things. You probably chose the words over the feeling. I am here to tell you, with the full weight of decades of behavioral science behind me, that you should start listening to that feeling, not as the final verdict, but as a signal that deserves your attention. Let me tell you what is actually happening in those moments. The face is the most studied and most revealing part of the human body when it comes to deception. There was a brilliant psychologist named Paul Ekman who spent his career mapping the muscles of the human face and discovering something remarkable. He found that there are tiny, lightning-fast expressions that flash across every human face in response to genuine emotion. He called them micro-expressions. And here is what makes them so important. They are universal. They appear in every culture on earth. They are biological, not learned. And they happen so quickly, in a fraction of a second, that the person displaying them usually has no idea they are doing it. And the person watching usually does not consciously register them either. But your brain registers them. Below the level of conscious awareness, your brain catches these flashes and translates them into that gut feeling that something is off. Now, in the context of someone lying to you, the most important micro-expressions to understand are fear, contempt, and distress. A person who is lying and is afraid of getting caught will flash tiny expressions of fear around their eyes and mouth. These are completely different from whatever calm, confident expression they are deliberately maintaining. It is like a crack in a mask. It appears for a fraction of a second, and then the mask is back. But it was there, and it told you the truth even while the mouth was telling you the opposite. Contempt is another one, and this is particularly important when dealing with someone who has been lying successfully for a long time. Habitual liars, people who have gotten away with deception over and over again, sometimes develop a subtle contempt for the people they are deceiving. And that contempt leaks out in a very specific micro-expression. A brief, one-sided curl of the upper lip. It is distinct from every other facial expression, and it is almost impossible to produce deliberately. When you see it, even for a split second, it is telling you something important about how the person across from you regards you in that moment. And then there is distress. Not all lies carry the same emotional weight. Some lies are casual and carry almost no internal cost to the person telling them, but when the lie touches something the person genuinely cares about, a relationship, a fear, something they are protecting with real emotional investment, the body often produces involuntary signals of distress that contradict the calm, controlled surface. A tightening around the eyes, a subtle compression of the lips, a fleeting expression of genuine pain that disappears as quickly as it appeared. Has this ever clicked for you in hindsight? Have you ever looked back on a conversation and realized that you saw something on the person's face that did not match what they were saying, but you dismissed it because the words sounded fine? You are not alone. Most people do that. We are trained by social convention to prioritize words over everything else. But words are the easiest thing to control. The face is not. Now let me take you below the neck, because the body has its own vocabulary of honesty that most people never think to read. Here is something fascinating. When a person is working very hard to control their face, their voice, and their words, they are pouring enormous cognitive resources into that management, which means the parts of the body that are receiving less conscious attention start expressing what the person is genuinely feeling. Researchers call this the leakage of affect. The suppressed emotion does not just vanish. It leaks into whatever channel is being monitored the least. And which part of the body receives the least monitoring in most conversations? The feet. I know that sounds almost funny, but stay with me because this is genuinely useful. People almost never think about what their feet are doing during a conversation, and because of that, the feet tend to express authentic impulses with remarkable freedom. A person who is feeling trapped by your questions will often orient their feet toward the nearest exit, even while the rest of their body is performing full engagement with you. A person who is managing internal tension will often show rhythmic tapping or bouncing in their feet that reveals the arousal state they are suppressing everywhere else. The hands tell a different and somewhat surprising story. You might expect that liars use more hand gestures, that they wave their hands around to seem more convincing. But the research actually shows the opposite. Liars tend to use fewer hand gestures than truthful people. And the reason is beautiful in its logic. Natural hand gestures are a byproduct of genuine cognitive processing. When you are truly recalling something real and describing it, your hands spontaneously accompany the narrative. They illustrate, they emphasize, they move because your brain and your body are working together authentically. But when someone is constructing a false account, so much cognitive energy is going into the construction, into maintaining the story, monitoring your reaction, checking for consistency, that there is simply less fuel left for spontaneous gesture. The result is a quality of stillness in the hands that looks controlled rather than natural. A kind of physical quietness that, once you know to look for it, feels distinctly different from the natural animation of honest speech. So, what does all this mean for you practically? It means that when you really want to understand whether someone is being straight with you, you need to watch the whole person, not just listen to the words. Watch the face for those split-second flashes that do not match the story. Watch the body for tension, posture shifts, and leakage. Watch the hands for the presence or absence of natural gesture. And most importantly, ask yourself one simple question. Does what I am seeing match what I am hearing? Does this person look and feel congruent? Or is there a gap between the performance above the neck and the truth leaking out everywhere else? This is not something you master overnight, but it is something you get better at with practice and with simply making the decision to watch more carefully than you have been watching. To treat the body not as background noise, but as a second, more honest voice in every conversation you have. And once you start watching more carefully, you will be ready for the next secret, because it is about the one thing that makes every liar's stomach drop: your questions. Secret 3. Liars are deeply uncomfortable with specific questions. Here's something I want you to really appreciate, because it is one of the most empowering things you can learn about the dynamics of deception. A skilled liar walks into a conversation prepared. They have thought about it in advance. They have imagined what you are likely to ask, and they have rehearsed responses that navigate those anticipated questions without exposing the lie. This preparation is a significant investment. It takes time, energy, and cognitive effort. But here's the thing. That preparation is also the liar's biggest vulnerability, because preparation, by its very nature, is limited. A liar can only prepare for the questions they expect, and the questions they expect are the ones that follow naturally and logically from the story they have constructed. What they cannot fully prepare for are questions that come from an unexpected direction. Questions that ask for a specific detail the story does not contain. Questions that require them to demonstrate or produce something their lie simply cannot provide. Has this ever happened to you in reverse? Have you ever been telling the complete truth about something and someone asked you a totally random, unexpected question about it? And you paused, searched your memory, and either found the answer or said honestly that you did not remember. Do you recall how that felt? It felt natural. It felt effortless. Because you were reaching into a real experience and either finding the detail or acknowledging that it was not there. Now, imagine the same scenario for someone who is lying. They get hit with an unexpected specific question, one they did not rehearse for, and suddenly they are in trouble, because they do not have a memory to reach into. They have a construction, and that construction only has detail where they decided to put detail. Everywhere else is empty scaffolding. At that moment, the liar has exactly two options, and neither one is comfortable. Option 1. They invent new detail on the spot. This is cognitively brutal. They have to generate something plausible, Make sure it does not contradict anything they have already said. Monitor your reaction to the new detail, and continue managing their overall presentation all at the same time. The mental load is enormous. And this is precisely why experienced questioners learn to ask specific, concrete questions in quick sequences. The cumulative demand of having to generate consistent new details repeatedly starts to degrade the performance. The seams begin to show. The answers get vaguer. The pace shifts. The confidence wavers. Option 2, they deflect. And deflection, once you know what to look for, has its own very recognizable fingerprint. A liar who is deflecting tends to do one of several things. They generalize. Instead of answering the specific question, they zoom out to a broader, safer level of response. You asked where exactly they were at 9:15 on Tuesday night. They tell you about what they were generally up to that evening. You asked what exactly was said in the conversation. They give you a vague summary of the general topic. Or they redirect. They introduce a new topic, a new detail, something that shifts the conversation's focus away from the question that made them uncomfortable. It feels natural in the moment because our brains are wired to follow the flow of conversation. But if you track what you actually asked against what you actually received as an answer, you notice the gap. Or, and this is the most subtle one, they answer a different question than the one you asked. They respond in a way that sounds like an answer, that has the rhythm and the confidence of a response, but that does not actually contain the specific information you requested. And most people do not catch this, because our conversational instinct is to register that a response was given, not to analyze whether the response actually matched the question. This is where a simple, powerful habit comes in, the habit of tracking. When you ask a specific question, note it mentally. Then listen to what comes back. Did you get the specific information you asked for? Or did you get something that felt like an answer, but actually was not one? And here is the beautiful part. You do not have to be aggressive about this. You do not have to turn the conversation into an interrogation. You just have to be patient and willing to circle back. Something like, I hear you, and I appreciate all of that. But I want to come back to what I originally asked. Can you walk me through specifically what happened at that point? That kind of calm, patient, specific follow-through puts extraordinary pressure on a prepared lie, because it requires the liar to go back to territory they thought they had safely passed. It tells them that their deflection did not work, and it forces them right back to the empty scaffolding of their construction, where they have to either build something new under pressure or deflect again, which itself becomes a pattern that you can see. There is one more type of specific question that is particularly powerful, and it is the kind that asks the liar to show rather than tell. Can you show me the message? Can you pull up the receipt? Can you introduce me to the person you mentioned? A liar who has constructed a false account of communication, a false location, a false relationship, is profoundly uncomfortable with requests for tangible evidence, because their story, no matter how polished and detailed, does not produce real artifacts. It does not leave real footprints. And the explanations they give for why the evidence is not available, the phone was lost, the message was deleted, the person moved away, these explanations are themselves data. They are part of the picture you are building, And when the explanations for why you cannot verify the story start accumulating, that accumulation tells its own story. I want you to carry this with you. You do not need to be confrontational. You do not need to be aggressive. You just need to be specific, patient, and willing to notice when a direct question does not receive a direct answer. That single habit, practiced gently and consistently, is one of the most powerful shields you can build against deception. And speaking of shields, the next secret is about one of the most disarming weapons a liar has in their entire arsenal. One that has probably worked on you more times than you realize. It is the weapon of emotion, and it is devastatingly effective. Secret 4. Liars use emotion as a weapon to shut you down. Of all the secrets we're going to explore together, this one might be the most immediately useful in your everyday life. And I say that because this mechanism, this specific tactic, is almost certainly operating in your world right now in ways you may have never fully recognized or been able to name. Once you see it, though, you will never unsee it, and it will change the way you navigate difficult conversations for the rest of your life. Here is the core of it. When a lie is threatened, when the walls start closing in and the possibility of being exposed becomes real, the liar's most reliable defense is not a better story. It is not a more convincing detail or a smoother explanation. Their most reliable defense is an emotional explosion that redirects your entire attention from the content of what they said to the intensity of what they are feeling. And that emotional explosion can take many forms. It might be sudden, volcanic anger. It might be tears. It might be a display of deep, wounded vulnerability. It might be cold, punishing silence. It might be a devastated expression of hurt that makes you feel like a monster for even asking the question. Or, and this is one of the most effective versions, it might be the quiet, devastating suggestion that the fact that you are questioning them at all is the real problem in this situation. Have you ever experienced this? Have you ever been in the middle of calmly asking someone a perfectly reasonable question and suddenly the whole conversation flipped? Suddenly, you were not the person seeking clarity anymore. You were the aggressor. You were the one being unreasonable. You were the one who needed to apologize. And before you knew it, the question you were asking, the thing you genuinely needed an answer to, just evaporated. It got swallowed up by the emotional storm, and you never got back to it. If that has happened to you, I need you to know something. That was not an accident. That was a strategy. Whether the person doing it was fully conscious of it or not, the mechanism was the same, and it has a name in psychology. It is called emotional flooding. Let me explain why it works so well, because the science behind it is genuinely fascinating. When someone near you becomes intensely emotional, your brain does something automatic. Your own emotional system activates. Your attention shifts away from whatever logical analysis you are doing and locks onto the emotional state of the person in front of you. This is hardwired. You cannot stop it from happening any more than you can stop yourself from flinching when someone throws something at your face. Your compassion fires. Your desire to fix things, to calm things down, to make the distress stop, starts competing with whatever analytical process you had going. And the questions you were tracking, the inconsistencies you were noticing, the specific answers you were waiting for, they suddenly feel secondary to the immediate human crisis happening right in front of your eyes. The liar who has learned this, whether through deliberate strategy or through years of trial and error, has an incredibly powerful weapon, and they deploy it at a very specific moment, not randomly, not at the beginning of the conversation. They deploy it at the exact moment when your questions are getting too close, when they sense that your logical examination of their story is approaching a point they cannot defend, when they feel the question coming that they have no good answer for. The timing is the tell. Remember that. The emotional display does not arrive at a random point in the conversation. It arrives precisely when the pressure on the lie reaches its peak. Let me walk you through the most common versions so you can recognize them. The anger response is probably the most frequently used and the most effective. When a liar responds to your calm, reasonable questioning with sudden, intense anger, they accomplish several things at once. They make you feel that your questioning is an attack. They shift the emotional center of the conversation from your legitimate concern about the truth to their outrage at being falsely accused. They create an atmosphere where continuing to ask your questions feels hostile and aggressive rather than reasonable and fair. And for anyone else watching, for the narrative of the relationship moving forward, they have established that you were the one who escalated, not them. Has that ever happened to you? You were calm, you were measured, you asked a simple question, and suddenly they exploded, and somehow, by the end of it, you were the one feeling guilty? Yeah, that is the mechanism. The tears and vulnerability response works through the opposite door, but arrives at the same destination. Where anger makes your questioning feel like aggression, tears make it feel like cruelty. The liar who becomes tearful, who shows pain and hurt at being doubted, who demonstrates what looks like genuine distress at the mere suggestion that they might not be telling the truth, activates your compassion in a way that directly competes with your desire for answers. How can you keep pressing someone who is clearly in pain? How can you continue demanding specifics from someone who appears genuinely devastated by your lack of trust? And here is where it gets really clever: the hurt withdrawal. This is related to tears but distinct in its mechanism. The liar who goes quiet, who becomes cold and distant, who treats your questions as a fundamental betrayal that requires emotional space to process. This person is using silence and distance as leverage. They are communicating, without saying a single word, that the price of your continued questioning is the relationship itself. And for most people, in most relationships, that implicit threat is simply too high a cost to pay. The questions stop. The issue gets buried. The lie survives another day. Does any of this sound familiar? Have you ever backed down from a question not because you got an answer, but because the emotional cost of continuing felt unbearable? If so, please hear me when I say this. That does not make you weak. It makes you human. These mechanisms work because you care. They work because you have empathy and compassion and a genuine desire not to cause pain. Those are beautiful qualities. The liar is exploiting them, but the qualities themselves are not the problem. The key, the thing I really want you to carry with you, is a single distinction that cuts through all of this. A truthful person who is genuinely upset can still answer your questions. With support, with patience, with kindness, they can still give you the specific information you need, because they have real answers to give. Their emotional state and the ability to address your concerns are not mutually exclusive. It is the liar whose emotional state and the answering of specific questions seem fundamentally incompatible because they are not using the emotion to express pain. They are using it to prevent the answering. That distinction right there is one of the most valuable things I can give you. Hold on to it tightly. Secret 5. Liars reshape your sense of what is real. We need to go somewhere a little darker now. Not because I want to scare you, but because this particular secret describes something that is genuinely dangerous, something that goes beyond ordinary lying into territory that can cause real, lasting psychological harm. And if it is happening to you or someone you love, recognizing it might be one of the most important things you ever do. This secret is about the difference between someone who lies about events and someone who lies about your experience of events. It is the difference between that did not happen and that did not happen the way you think it did, and the fact that you think it happened that way is actually proof that something is wrong with you. This phenomenon has a name that most people have heard, but very few people truly understand in its full depth. It is called gaslighting. And while that word has become common in everyday conversation, what it actually describes is far more destructive than most people realize. Gaslighting is not just lying. It is the systematic, sustained dismantling of your trust in your own perception. It is someone telling you, consistently and confidently, that what you saw did not happen the way you saw it, that your memory is wrong, that your interpretation is distorted, that your emotional response to something real was an overreaction, that the concern you are raising is not a sign that something is wrong in the situation. It is a sign that something is wrong with you. Has something like this ever happened to you? Have you ever walked out of a conversation feeling confused about something you were sure about when you walked in? Have you ever started a discussion knowing exactly what you experienced only to end it, wondering if maybe you really did misremember? Have you ever found yourself apologizing for having a feeling instead of having that feeling taken seriously? If any of that resonates, I need you to pay very close attention to what comes next. The effect of sustained gaslighting on a human being's psychology is profound, and it is measurable. Over time, the person on the receiving end begins to genuinely doubt their own perceptions, not because they are weak, not because they are stupid, but because the human mind determines what is real partly through social confirmation. We check our perceptions against the responses of people we trust. When someone you love, someone you have invested your trust in, consistently tells you that your version of reality is wrong, the sheer weight of that repeated contradiction begins to erode your confidence in your own mind. And that is exactly what the gaslighter is counting on. Let me give you the practical signs, the things you can actually look for, because naming them is the first step to breaking free. You find yourself apologizing for your perceptions and feelings with a frequency that does not feel normal. Not apologizing because you made a mistake, but apologizing for seeing what you saw and feeling what you felt. You doubt your memory of conversations and events in a way that is new to you. You used to trust your recall. Now you constantly second-guess it, but only in the context of this one particular relationship. You feel confused about your own reactions. You find yourself asking whether your emotional responses are appropriate rather than simply having them and trusting them. You feel less capable, less stable, less reliable as a person than you used to feel. And when you trace when that feeling started, it correlates directly with the deepening of a specific relationship. Does any of that ring a bell? Even a little? Because here's what I want you to understand. These are not signs that something is wrong with you. These are signs that something is being done to you. There is a world of difference between those two things. The gaslighter succeeds partly through isolation. They work, often gradually and subtly, to undermine your connections to other people who might offer an independent check on your reality. They discourage certain friendships. They cast doubt on the judgment of people you trust. They create situations where their version of events is the only version you have access to. And once that isolation is in place, once they are the only mirror you have, they can make that mirror show you whatever they want. The protection against this, and please hear this clearly, because it matters more than almost anything else in this entire discussion, is the maintenance of external reality testing. That means keeping relationships and information sources outside the relationship with the gaslighter that can provide an independent check on your perceptions. It means having people in your life who knew you before, who can reflect back to you who you actually are, who can say with love and honesty, "No, I remember that conversation too. You are not making that up." If someone in your life is actively working to cut you off from those external references, if they are discouraging your friendships, undermining your family connections, suggesting that the people who care about you are the problem, that behavior itself is one of the loudest signals that manipulation is at work. And I want to say one more thing about this before we move on, because it comes from a place of genuine care. If you recognize yourself in any of what I just described, please do not minimize it. Do not tell yourself it is not that bad. Do not tell yourself that you are overreacting, because that voice, that instinct to minimize and dismiss your own experience, that might be the gaslighter's voice living in your head. And the bravest thing you can do is start trusting yourself again. Start small. Start with one person you trust. Tell them what you have been experiencing and ask them to help you see clearly. You deserve to live in a reality that is yours, not one that has been constructed for you by someone else. Now, take a breath. We have covered some heavy ground, but the next secret takes us somewhere different, somewhere that is going to arm you with one of the most practical, immediately usable tools in this entire discussion. Because the next secret lives in the very words that come out of a liar's mouth. And once you know what to listen for, you will hear the truth hiding inside the lie itself. Secret 6. The words themselves betray the liar. Here is something beautiful about the truth. Even when someone is trying desperately to hide it, it finds ways to leak out. We talked about how the body betrays the liar. We talked about how emotion is weaponized and how reality itself can be distorted. But now we are going to look at something even more intimate than the body or the emotions. We are going to look at the actual words. The very tools the liar uses to build their deception are also, quietly and consistently, revealing it. And the best part? Once you learn these patterns, you do not need special training. You do not need to be a psychologist or an FBI interrogator. You just need to listen, Really listen, not just to what someone is saying, but to how they are assembling the words they choose. Let me walk you through the patterns, because they are genuinely fascinating and immediately useful. The first pattern is something researchers call distancing language, and it is one of the most consistent linguistic signatures of deception ever documented. Here's what happens. When someone is lying about their own actions, about something they personally did or somewhere they personally were, they often unconsciously increase the psychological distance between themselves and the events they are describing. They pull back from the lie, not physically, but linguistically, and it shows up in a very specific way. Instead of saying, "I put the files on the desk," the distancing liar says, "The files were put on the desk." Instead of, "I called her at 8, they say, "She was called at 8. Instead of, "I was there," they say, "Someone was there." Do you see what is happening? The I disappears. The first person gets replaced by passive constructions and third-person references. The speaker is linguistically removing themselves from the action, creating a subtle but measurable separation between who they are and what they are claiming happened. And here is the really interesting thing. Most liars do not do this on purpose. It is not a conscious choice. It is an unconscious expression of discomfort with owning the lie. Some part of their mind does not want to fully inhabit the false statement, does not want to stand behind it with the full weight of, "I did this," and that reluctance leaves a trace in the language that you can learn to hear. Have you ever noticed this in conversation? Someone telling you about something they supposedly did, but using oddly impersonal language to describe it, as if they were narrating someone else's actions rather than their own. That might have been your brain picking up on distancing language without knowing what to call it. The second pattern is hedging language appearing in places where it does not belong. Phrases like, "to the best of my recollection," or "as far as I am aware," or "I believe that," or "I am pretty sure," are perfectly normal parts of honest speech. We all use them when we are genuinely uncertain about something. That is not the signal. The signal is when these hedging phrases show up surrounding details that a person with real first-hand knowledge would state with simple, direct confidence. When someone says, "I believe I was home that evening," about an evening they were genuinely home, the hedging is strange. Why would you hedge about where you were? You were there, you know. But when someone says it about an evening they were not home, the hedging makes perfect sense. It is the discomfort of claiming certain knowledge you do not actually have, softened by qualifiers that give you a linguistic escape route if challenged. Listen for the hedging. But more importantly, listen for where the hedging appears. Is it in a place where genuine uncertainty would be natural? Or is it wrapped around a detail that the person should know with complete confidence if their story is true? The third pattern is one of my favorites because it is so reliably present in deceptive communication that once you hear it, you will start catching it everywhere. It is what I call the preemptive defense, and it sounds like this. "I know this might sound weird, but I genuinely was at the gym for 3 hours. And I know you probably will not believe this, but the trainer was there and he would remember me. And I can show you my gym bag if you need proof." Do you hear that? Did you feel the difference between that and how a truthful person would answer the same question? A truthful person says, "I was at the gym," and moves on. They do not anticipate your doubt before you have expressed any. They do not preemptively build a defense around a claim that, if true, needs no defense. They do not offer evidence before evidence has been asked for. The liar does all of these things because they know their claim is weak. They can feel its vulnerability, and they try to get ahead of your doubt by surrounding the central lie with layers of qualification, evidence offering, and challenge anticipation. It is as if they are arguing a case they have not yet been asked to argue, and that premature defensiveness is a remarkably consistent signal. Has someone ever answered a question you had not asked yet? Has someone ever started defending a position before you challenged it? Has someone ever offered proof before you expressed any doubt? Think about how that felt. Something about it probably felt off. Even if you could not articulate why at the time, now you can articulate it. They were defending against a challenge that only existed in their mind because they knew the truth behind the claim, and the truth made the claim indefensible. The fourth pattern is a reduction in self-reference. This is related to distancing language but operates at a broader level. Studies analyzing both written and spoken deceptive communication have consistently found that liars use the word I less frequently than truthful people. Across cultures, across contexts, across languages, this pattern holds. The liar does not want to own the lie. They do not want to inhabit it fully in the first person, and that reluctance shows up as a measurable reduction in how often they place themselves at the center of their own account. This is not something you would notice in a single sentence, but across the span of a conversation, across the full narrative of an explanation or an account, the relative absence of I compared to what you would expect from someone genuinely describing their own experience is a quiet but powerful signal. The fifth pattern, and this is perhaps the most subtle of all, is the incongruity between emotional language and factual language. When a truthful person describes something that was emotionally significant, the emotion and the facts come out woven together. They are integrated because, for the truthful person, the experience was integrated. They tell you what happened and how it felt as a single unified stream. I walked in and my heart just dropped because everything was on the floor and I could not believe what I was seeing, and I remember my hands were shaking. When a liar describes a fabricated emotional event, there is often a visible seam between the emotional component and the factual component. They tell you what happened, and then they tell you how they felt about it, as two separate deliveries rather than one unified experience. The emotion feels bolted on rather than woven through. It has a quality of assembly, of having been added to the facts rather than having arisen naturally from them. This is hard to put into words, but easy to feel once you know to listen for it. The next time someone tells you about an emotionally significant experience, pay attention to whether the emotion and the facts arrive as one thing or two things. Whether it feels like a memory being relived or a script being performed with emotional annotations added afterward. These 5 patterns, distancing language, misplaced hedging, preemptive defense, reduced self-reference, and the emotion-fact seam, are your linguistic toolkit. You do not need all 5 to be present to be concerned. Even one, appearing clearly and in a context that matters, is worth paying attention to. And now, let me introduce you to someone you may already know. Someone who does not just tell a lie here and there. Someone who has built an entire life around it. Secret 7. The habitual liar has built a system. Not all liars are the same. Some people lie occasionally, situationally, when the pressure gets high enough, or the consequences feel scary enough. These occasional liars are relatively easy to read because lying is stressful for them, their anxiety is visible, their guilt is detectable, their body and their language show the strain of doing something that does not come naturally. But there is another category, and this category is both rarer and far more dangerous. These are the people who have been lying consistently for so long that it has become their operating system. Psychologists call them habitual or pathological liars, and understanding how they function is critically important because they play by different rules. The habitual liar does not experience lying the way you or I would. Through years of practice, through the slow erosion of whatever internal discomfort they once felt about dishonesty, they have desensitized themselves to the cognitive and emotional cost of deception. The anxiety that would give away an occasional liar, dampened. The guilt that would create visible stress, reduced to almost nothing. The physiological arousal that makes the body betray the amateur, managed to the point of near invisibility. What they have built instead is a system, and that system has several very distinctive characteristics that are worth understanding. The first is compartmentalization. The systematic liar maintains strict separations between different parts of their life because different parts of their life know different versions of the truth. They are extraordinarily careful about who knows whom. They manage social connections the way an intelligence operative manages assets, keeping people and groups and contexts separate so that no one can compare notes and discover the inconsistencies. Have you ever known someone who seemed oddly resistant to different parts of their life coming together? Someone who got strangely uncomfortable when friends from one circle met friends from another? Someone who managed their social world with a level of deliberateness that felt more like administration than natural social behavior? That resistance to overlap, that careful management of who knows whom, might not be introversion or preference. It might be the architecture of compartmentalization. The second characteristic is what I call manufactured consistency. The systematic liar knows that consistency is what most people equate with honesty. If the story stays the same every time it is told, it must be true, right? So they work very hard to maintain consistent accounts across time. They memorize their stories. They rehearse them. They deliver them with the same details in the same order every time. But here's how you can tell the difference between the consistency of truth and the consistency of a memorized performance. Ask for something new. Ask for a detail that was not part of the original account. The truthful person can go back into their real memory and often find new details because the real event is still there, available for continued exploration. The systematic liar, when pushed beyond the borders of their memorized account, begins to show cracks. The confidence wavers. The smoothness falters because there is nothing beyond the edge of the script. The third characteristic is the quality of their explanations. The systematic liar has had years of practice generating explanations for moments when their various stories do not quite align. They have explanations for their explanations. They have backup reasons prepared for why the evidence says one thing when their version says another. In the short term, this can make them appear extraordinarily convincing. But over time, the explanations begin to stack, layer upon layer upon layer of elaborate reasoning, where a simple, truthful account would need none. And that very elaborateness, that complexity of justification where simplicity should live, is itself a tell. The fourth characteristic is their relationship with trust, and this might be the most important one to understand. The systematic liar needs trust the way a fire needs oxygen. Without your trust, their entire operation collapses, so they are often extraordinarily skilled at creating the appearance of trustworthiness. They can seem warm, open, generous, vulnerable, consistently present. They know exactly what trust looks like because they have been studying it and performing it for their entire lives. But the trust they create is instrumental. It is a tool built to serve the deception. And beneath the warmth and the openness and the apparent vulnerability, there is a consistent orientation that, if you watch carefully over time, reveals itself. They trust their own performance rather than their own truth. Their confidence comes not from the security of being genuine, but from the security of being convincing. And there is a subtle but real difference in how that feels to be around. Have you ever known someone who seemed trustworthy, who checked all the boxes, who said all the right things and showed up in all the right ways, and yet something in you never fully relaxed around them? Something that you could not point to or name, but that kept a small part of you on alert? Trust that feeling. It might be picking up on exactly what we just described. The difference between someone who is genuinely trustworthy and someone who is performing trustworthiness with extraordinary skill. And with that understanding, we are ready for the next secret, one that gives you something incredibly valuable, an early warning system. Because it turns out that before a liar tells you the big lie, they almost always run a test first. Secret 8. Liars test you before they commit to the big lie. This secret might genuinely change your life, and I do not say that lightly, because what I am about to describe is not just an interesting psychological insight. It is an early warning system, a way to detect deception before it fully arrives, a way to see the lie coming before it lands. And if you develop the habit I'm about to share with you, you will make yourself an extraordinarily difficult target for anyone who relies on dishonesty to navigate their world. Here's what happens. Before a significant lie is told, in many cases, the liar runs a test. Think of it as a trial balloon, a small, low-stakes misrepresentation sent out into the conversation to measure how you respond. It might be a minor distortion of something that happened, a slight exaggeration, a small claim about something trivial that is not quite accurate. The content of the test lie does not matter. What matters is what the liar is watching for in your reaction. And what are they watching for? Everything. They are watching to see if you notice the inaccuracy. They are watching to see if you say something about it or let it slide. They are watching to see whether you prioritize accuracy or harmony, whether your discomfort with confrontation is stronger than your commitment to truth, whether you are the kind of person who adjusts their own understanding of reality to accommodate what someone else says, or whether you are the kind of person who holds on to what they actually know and names the discrepancy calmly and clearly. Has this ever happened to you? Has someone ever said something small that you knew was not quite right and you let it go? Maybe because it felt petty to correct them. Maybe because you did not want to create tension. Maybe because the inaccuracy seemed so minor that it was not worth the awkwardness of pointing it out. I completely understand that impulse. It is a kind and socially graceful impulse. But I want you to understand what happened in that moment from the liar's perspective. What they learned is that you will adjust, that you will accommodate, that your desire for peace is stronger than your need for precision. And that information, that single data point, tells them everything they need to know about whether a larger deception is likely to succeed with you. Let me give you an example that might feel familiar. Imagine a friend tells you they arrived at a party at 8 o'clock, but you know, because you were there, that they did not show up until almost 9:30. It is a small thing. It does not really matter in any practical sense, and so you let it go. You do not say anything. Maybe you even nod along. What just happened? From your perspective, you were being easygoing. From their perspective, you just passed the test. You demonstrated that you will accept a version of events that conflicts with what you actually know, rather than name the conflict. And if that person has something bigger they need you to believe down the road, they now know that the ground has been prepared. Now imagine the alternative. Imagine that when your friend says they arrived at 8, you say, gently and without any drama, "Oh, really? I thought it was a bit later than that. I remember because I had been there for a while before you showed up." That is it. No accusation, no hostility, no interrogation, just a calm, clear, factual observation that what they said does not match what you know. That response sends a completely different signal. It tells the liar, this person notices. This person does not automatically adjust their reality to match mine. This person holds on to what they know and names it without aggression, but without backing down. The cost-benefit calculation of maintaining a deception with someone like this just changed dramatically. And here is what is beautiful about this. You do not have to do it in a way that damages the relationship. You do not have to be suspicious or confrontational or unkind. You just have to be honest. Gently, consistently, naturally honest about what you observe and what you know. That habit, practiced over time, makes you a remarkably unappealing target for deception. Because the habitual liar, encountering someone who calmly and consistently notes when things do not add up, tends to redirect their energy elsewhere. They look for softer ground. They look for someone whose need for harmony will protect the lie. You might be thinking, but what about small social lies? What about the kind of harmless exaggerations that everyone does? And that is a fair question. I am not suggesting you become the person who corrects every trivial inaccuracy in every casual conversation. That would be exhausting for everyone, including you. What I am suggesting is that you develop an internal awareness, that you notice even when you choose not to act, when someone presents you with something that does not match what you know, and that in the moments that matter, in the relationships that matter, in the situations where accuracy is important, you practice the gentle art of naming what you see. Because that habit does not just protect you from liars. It builds something even more valuable. It builds a reputation, quiet and unspoken, but deeply felt by everyone around you as someone who lives in reality, someone who sees clearly, someone who can be trusted not because they are aggressive or suspicious, but because they are honestly, gently, unshakably present in the truth of what they observe. And that reputation is one of the most powerful things a human being can carry. Now, we have talked about how liars build their stories, how they manage their bodies, how they deploy emotion, how they attack your reality, how they use language, how they build systems, and how they test you before committing. But the next secret is something different, something that takes everything we have discussed and adds a layer of sophistication that makes deception genuinely, maddeningly difficult to detect. Because the most dangerous liars in the world do not just use lies, they use truth. Secret 9. The most dangerous liars weaponize truth itself. This might be the most intellectually challenging secret in everything we have covered, and it is the one that most completely shatters the simple idea that people are either honest or dishonest. Because the most skilled deceivers in the world have figured out something that makes them extraordinarily difficult to catch. They have figured out that truth, strategically deployed, is actually the most powerful lying tool that exists. Let me explain, because this is genuinely important. A liar who tells you nothing but fabricated falsehoods is actually in a relatively vulnerable position. Their entire account is invented, which means their entire account can potentially be checked and disproven by anyone with enough information and enough motivation to look. Every element of the story is a potential point of failure. Every detail is something that might not hold up under scrutiny. But a liar who builds their deception primarily from true facts, with only certain critical elements altered or left out, is in a completely different position. And this is the version of deception that catches smart, careful, experienced people. Because when you check the facts, most of them check out. And every fact that checks out makes the entire account feel more credible. That credibility then extends like a halo to the small number of elements that are not true. The true parts provide cover for the false parts. And the result is a deception that is almost invisible. Have you ever found out that someone misled you and felt that strange, disorienting sensation of not being able to say you were technically lied to? Where every individual thing they told you was true, and yet the overall impression you were left with was completely false. Where you felt deceived but could not point to a single false statement. That feeling is the signature of this technique, and it is one of the most confusing and psychologically disorienting experiences in the entire domain of deception. Let me give you an example to make this concrete. Imagine someone tells you about their evening. They say they went to a conference, had dinner with colleagues, attended the keynote presentation, and headed back to the hotel around 10. Every single one of those facts is true. They were at the conference. They did have dinner with colleagues. They did attend the keynote. They did head back toward the hotel around 10. What they did not mention is who else was at that dinner. What they did not mention is the conversation that happened afterward. What they did not mention is that heading back toward the hotel and going to their own room are not the same thing. Every fact they gave you is verifiable and true. The deception lives entirely in what was left out, in the architecture of the account rather than its content, in the gap between what was said and what a complete, honest account would have included. This is what researchers call selective truth, or strategic omission, or misleading with facts. And the common thread across all these names is the understanding that the most convincing false impression is one that is built almost entirely from genuine material. The liar does not need to invent a false world. They just need to carefully curate the real one. And this is genuinely hard to defend against using the normal tools of truth-checking. Because the normal question, the instinctive question, the one most of us ask when we are trying to determine honesty, is this: is what they are saying true? And with selective truth, the answer to that question is yes. Yes to every single part of it. And yet the overall impression is completely, deliberately misleading. So how do you protect yourself? You change the question. Instead of asking, is this true? You ask, is this complete? Instead of checking whether the facts you received are accurate, you start thinking about what a full, complete, nothing left out account of this situation would include. And then you notice what is missing. This is a different kind of listening. It is not about catching falsehoods. It is about sensing gaps. It is about developing the habit of asking yourself, what would I need to know to truly understand this situation? And is there something that a complete account would include that this account does not? Let me give you some practical questions that activate this kind of thinking. When someone tells you about a situation, ask yourself, who else was involved that has not been mentioned? What happened before and after the part of the story I am hearing? Are there any perspectives on this situation that would look different from the one I am being given? Is there a reason the person telling me this would benefit from me not knowing certain parts? These questions do not require suspicion. They do not require hostility. They just require the awareness that every account is told from a perspective, and every perspective includes choices about what to emphasize and what to leave in the background. The habit of asking what is missing rather than just evaluating what is present is the single most effective defense against sophisticated deception. It shifts your analysis from individual fact-checking, which the selective truth is designed to survive, to whole picture evaluation, which exposes the gaps and omissions that the selective truth was specifically designed to conceal. And I want to tell you something important about this habit. Developing it does not make you paranoid. It does not make you cynical. It makes you complete. It makes you someone who understands that every story has more than what is being told, and who approaches that understanding with curiosity rather than suspicion. You can ask what is missing with genuine warmth and genuine care. You can notice a gap and explore it with kindness rather than accusation. In fact, sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is to gently create space for the parts of the story they left out. Sometimes people omit things not because they are predatory liars, but because they are afraid. Afraid of your reaction, afraid of judgment, afraid of consequences. And when you make it safe to fill in the gaps, when you show that you can receive the complete picture with compassion, you're not just protecting yourself from deception. You are creating the conditions for deeper, more honest, more genuine connection. And that is always, always worth doing. Now, we are going to move into territory that reveals something truly unsettling about how deception operates at a social level. Because the next secret is about something most people never consider. The fact that when someone builds a significant lie, they almost never do it entirely alone. They build an ecosystem around it. And the most disturbing part? Most of the people in that ecosystem have absolutely no idea they are participating in a deception. Secret 10. Liars build an invisible army of unknowing supporters. This secret is one of the most unsettling things we are going to discuss. Not because it is dark in the way gaslighting is dark, but because it reveals something about the social architecture of deception that most people have never even considered. And once you see it, you will understand why some lies survive for months, years, even decades without ever being exposed. Here is the truth. When a liar builds a deception of any real significance or duration, they almost never do it entirely on their own. Whether they fully realize it or not, they need a supporting cast. They need people around them who will in various ways confirm their story, defend their character, or simply refrain from asking the questions that would unravel everything. They need an ecosystem. And the genius of how this works, the part that should genuinely make you pause and think, is that the vast majority of people recruited into this ecosystem have absolutely no idea they are part of it. Let me explain how this happens, because the mechanism is both simple and devastatingly effective. The liar uses selective information sharing. They tell different people different partial truths. Person A gets one piece of the picture. Person B gets another piece. Person C gets yet another. Each person's piece is accurate as far as it goes. Each person genuinely believes what they have been told because what they have been told is, within its limited frame, true. And each of these people, speaking from genuine belief about their genuine piece of the puzzle, becomes an unwitting corroborator of the larger false narrative. Has this ever happened to you? Have you ever vouched for someone, defended someone, confirmed someone's story, only to find out later that you were working with incomplete information? That the piece you knew was true, but the picture it was part of was false? That your genuine, honest testimony was being used as a building block in someone else's deception? If that has happened to you, I need you to know that it was not your fault. You were not gullible. You were not stupid. You were honestly reporting what you honestly knew. The deception was not in what you said. It was in what you were never told. Let me paint a picture so you can see how this works in practice. Imagine someone is deceiving their partner about where they spend their time. They tell their colleague honestly that they are working late on a project. They tell their friend honestly that they have been stressed and need some space. They tell their partner that they were working late and then grabbed a drink with a friend to decompress. Every person in this chain is telling the truth about the part they know. The colleague can confirm the late work. The friend can confirm the need for space. And the partner, hearing an account that is supported by real people with real knowledge, has no reason to doubt it. But the complete picture, the one that includes all the parts that each individual person does not know, tells a very different story. And no single person in the ecosystem has enough of that complete picture to see the deception. Each person is holding a piece of a jigsaw puzzle and seeing a perfectly reasonable image. The lie is not in any single piece. It is in the assembly. It is in what connects the pieces and what has been deliberately kept out of the frame. This is why some lies are so incredibly resistant to detection. It is not that the liar is a mastermind. It is that they have, consciously or instinctively, distributed the truth across multiple people in a way that prevents anyone from seeing the whole thing. So how do you protect yourself from this? Not by becoming suspicious of everyone in your network. That would be exhausting and unfair to the people who genuinely care about you. The protection is subtler than that. It lies in understanding that each person in any network has access to only their part of the picture, and that the picture as a whole needs to be assembled rather than assumed. It means being willing, when something feels off, to gently compare notes. Not in an accusatory way, not in a way that puts people on the spot or creates drama, but simply as a natural act of curiosity. Mentioning to one friend what another friend said and noticing whether the accounts align. Asking a question in one context that references information from another context, and watching whether the pieces fit together seamlessly or whether there are subtle gaps and divergences that suggest each person is working from a slightly different script. It also means paying attention to the liar's behavior around social mixing. The liar who relies on compartmentalized information sharing will be uncomfortable when different parts of their ecosystem come into contact. They will resist situations where people from different contexts might compare notes. They will have reasons, always plausible, always reasonable sounding, for why certain people should not connect or certain conversations should not happen. That resistance, that careful management of who talks to whom, is itself a signal, not proof, but a signal worth noting and worth holding alongside everything else you are learning. And I want to say something here that comes from genuine compassion, because I know this secret can feel overwhelming. The existence of this mechanism does not mean you should stop trusting people. It does not mean every social circle is a web of deception. Most people, most of the time, are sharing information honestly and completely. What this secret gives you is not suspicion. It gives you awareness. The awareness that no single source, no matter how trusted, gives you the complete picture of anything, and that the habit of gently, respectfully assembling a fuller picture from multiple perspectives is not paranoia. It is wisdom. Now let us go somewhere truly fascinating, because the next secret takes us inside the mind of the liar in a way that nothing else we have discussed quite does. It asks a question that sounds simple, but has an answer that is genuinely profound. What happens to a person who lives inside their own lie for long enough? Secret 11. The liar's relationship with their own lie changes over time. This is perhaps the most psychologically complex thing we are going to explore together, and it is the one that I think will most deeply change the way you understand the people in your life who have been dishonest with you. Because lies, particularly the big ones, particularly the ones that are maintained over months and years, do not stay external to the person telling them. They do not remain separate, like a mask that can be taken off at the end of the day. Over time, through mechanisms that psychology has documented with remarkable clarity, the lie begins to merge with the liar's own sense of reality. And that changes everything. Let me walk you through how this happens, because it is genuinely fascinating. The first mechanism is rehearsal. Every time the liar tells their false story, every time they mentally review it in preparation for a conversation that might challenge it, They are strengthening the neural pathways associated with that account. This is not metaphorical. This is neuroscience. Memory research has consistently demonstrated that the repeated rehearsal of any event, whether that event was real or completely imagined, increases its subjective feeling of familiarity and realness in the mind of the person rehearsing it. The liar who has told their false account dozens or hundreds of times begins to have a relationship with that account that increasingly resembles the relationship any of us have with our genuine memories. The story starts to feel familiar, it starts to feel real, not because it is real, but because the brain does not perfectly distinguish between "I remember this because it happened" and "I remember this because I have thought about it so many times." Have you ever had the experience of telling a story about yourself so many times that you were no longer sure whether you were remembering the actual event or remembering the last time you told the story about the event? Most of us have had that experience with true stories. Now imagine that process applied to a false story, told and retold and internally rehearsed hundreds of times over years. The boundary between construction and memory begins to blur, not completely, but significantly. The second mechanism is investment through defense. Every time the liar protects their false account against challenge, every time they generate the emotional energy and the logical arguments to preserve it against someone's doubt, they are investing further in it psychologically. And human beings have a deep, well-documented tendency to believe more strongly in things they have fought for. The lie becomes something they have defended, something they have sacrificed for, something around which important personal narratives have accumulated. And things we fight for, things we risk for, begin to feel true to us in ways that things we simply receive sometimes do not. Think about that for a moment. The very act of defending a lie makes the liar believe it more. Each defense deepens the investment. Each successful protection of the story adds another layer of psychological ownership. The lie stops being something they are carrying and starts being something they are living inside. The third mechanism is what psychologists sometimes call belief echo. And this is the one that I find most remarkable and most heartbreaking. In sustained, long-term deception, the consistent performance of a false account begins to generate genuine, partial belief in that account within the mind of the person performing it. The liar starts to partially believe their own lie, not completely, not with the simple, unquestioned certainty of someone who actually experienced the real event, but with a blurred, confused, partial conviction that makes it genuinely difficult for them to know in certain moments where the truth ends and the fabrication begins. This is not a conscious choice. It is not the liar deciding to believe their own story. It is the psychological consequence of maintaining a fiction with such consistency, such emotional investment, and such sustained rehearsal that the fiction and the reality have begun at the edges to merge. And this has practical implications that you need to understand if you are going to navigate the world of deception with real wisdom. It means that some liars, when confronted, will show genuine distress, not perform distress, not the tactical emotional flooding we discussed earlier, genuine, real, heartfelt distress. because from their perspective, in the blurred landscape of their own psychology, the account they are defending feels in important ways true to them. They are not performing innocence. They are experiencing something that genuinely resembles the feeling of being falsely accused, even though the accusation is accurate. This is incredibly confusing for the person on the receiving end, because we are trained, correctly in most circumstances, to read genuine emotional distress as a sign of honesty. If they are that upset, they must be telling the truth, right? Not necessarily, not when you are dealing with someone whose relationship with truth has become deeply compromised through the mechanisms we just described. Their emotional responses to challenge are not reliable indicators of the accuracy of their account. They are indicators of the depth of their psychological entanglement with their own fabrication. Does this change how you should feel about such a person? I think it should, actually. Not in the direction of excusing what they have done, but in the direction of understanding the profound psychological cost of sustained deception. A person who has lied so long and so deeply that they can no longer clearly distinguish their own truth from their own fiction is not someone who is winning at life. They are someone who has lost access to something fundamental, their own clarity, their own relationship with reality, their own ability to know with simple confidence what actually happened and what they made up. That is not power. That is a kind of prison. And while it does not excuse the harm they have caused, understanding it gives you something that mere anger does not. It gives you the ability to see the full picture, the liar's picture, the picture of someone who started with a choice and ended up trapped by the consequences of that choice in ways they may never have anticipated. And honestly, that understanding makes you more powerful, not less. Because when you can see the whole system, when you can see not just what the liar is doing to you, but what the lie is doing to them, you are operating with a completeness of vision that puts you in a fundamentally different position. You are not just reacting. You are understanding. And understanding, in the domain of human psychology, is always the higher ground. Now, we are approaching the final stretch, and the next two secrets are going to bring everything together. One will give you a tool so simple and so powerful that it requires no training, no special knowledge, and no confrontation. Just the willingness to do something that most people find surprisingly difficult. Be quiet and watch what happens. Secret 12. Silence is the one thing a liar cannot handle. We have covered a tremendous amount of ground together. You now understand how liars construct stories, how their bodies betray them, how specific questions create pressure, how emotion is weaponized, how reality is distorted, how language leaks the truth, how systems are built, how tests are run, how truth itself is turned into a weapon, how allies are unknowingly recruited, and how the liar's own mind eventually becomes entangled in the lie. That is an extraordinary toolkit. But this next secret, this one might be the simplest and the most powerful of everything we have discussed, because it requires no training, no special knowledge, no confrontation, no clever questions, no analytical framework. It requires only one thing, your willingness to be quiet. Here's what silence does to a person who is lying. When you respond to a lie with a question, the liar knows what to do. They have a direction to move in. They have an answer to provide, a deflection to execute. an emotion to deploy. Your question gives them a cue, and they respond to that cue with whatever they have prepared. The interaction is manageable because it follows a predictable structure. You ask, they answer. You challenge, they defend. The conversation has a rhythm that the liar can navigate. But when you respond to a lie with silence, everything changes. Silence removes the cue. It strips away the structure. It takes away the data the liar needs to manage the interaction. When you simply look at them attentively, calmly, without rushing to fill the space with your next question or your next thought, the liar suddenly does not know what you are thinking. They do not know whether you believe them. They do not know whether you have detected the lie and are simply waiting. They do not know what comes next. And that uncertainty, that profound not knowing about what is happening in the mind of the person who is supposed to be receiving the story, is deeply, viscerally destabilizing. Have you ever been in a conversation where someone just looked at you after you said something and did not immediately respond? Do you remember how that felt? Even if you were telling the complete truth, there is something about silence that makes the human nervous system activate. We are social creatures. We are wired to seek feedback, to read responses, to calibrate based on what we are getting back from the person in front of us. When that feedback disappears, when the social mirror goes blank, something in us scrambles to fill the void. Now multiply that discomfort by the weight of a lie. Multiply it by the knowledge held somewhere deep in the liar's nervous system, even if they will not admit it to themselves, that what they just said is not true. Silence in that context is not just uncomfortable, it is almost unbearable. And what happens when it becomes unbearable? The liar fills it, not because they want to say more, not because they have more convincing points to add, but because the silence feels threatening and talking feels like management. It feels like doing something. It feels like regaining a measure of control over an interaction that has suddenly slipped out of their grasp. And here is where it gets really useful for you. The things a liar says when they are filling your silence are often the most revealing things they say in the entire conversation. They add details they had not planned to add. They elaborate in directions they had not prepared for. They circle back to things they already said and repeat them with slight variations. And those variations, the tiny differences between the first telling and the second telling, revealed a gap between a rehearsed story and a genuine memory. They ask you what you are thinking, which is itself a powerful tell. Because a truthful person who has said what they had to say generally does not need to monitor your response with anxious urgency. It is the liar who needs to know desperately whether the performance is working. Each of these behaviors, the unsolicited additional detail, the unplanned elaboration, the anxious retelling, the urgent request for your reaction, is a gift to you. It is information that the liar did not intend to provide, generated by the pressure of your silence. Learning to be genuinely, comfortably silent after someone has said something you are not sure about is a practice that pays extraordinary dividends, and it costs you nothing. You do not have to say anything clever. You do not have to have your next question ready. You just have to be willing to sit in the quiet for a moment longer than feels natural, to let the space stay open, to communicate without a single word that you are thinking carefully about what you have just heard. For the truthful person, your silence is not a problem. They said what they said. They know it is true. They can wait comfortably for whatever comes next. For the liar, your silence is one of the most uncomfortable things they will ever encounter, and in their discomfort lies your clarity. Secret 13. The truth about why people lie to you. We have spent this entire journey examining how people lie, the mechanics, the strategies, the tells, the systems, the language, the body, the social engineering. But there is one final secret that matters as much as everything else combined. And it is not about how. It is about why. Because understanding why someone lies to you tells you something profound, not just about them, but about the relationship you are in with them, and about what it might take to change it. People do not lie randomly. They lie for reasons. Consistent, psychologically coherent, deeply human reasons. And those reasons fall into categories, each with its own implications for how you should respond. The first category is protective lying, lying to avoid consequences. This is the most common form of deception on earth, and it spans an enormous range of moral weight. At one end is the child who says they did not eat the chocolate because they are afraid of being scolded. At the other end is the executive who destroys evidence to avoid prosecution. In between are a million ordinary human moments where someone chose the lie because the truth felt too expensive. What does protective lying tell you about the relationship? Something important. The person lying to you does not believe or has learned not to believe that the truth will be received in a way they can survive. They think the honest answer will bring a response that is worse than the risk of deception. Now, whether that belief is accurate is the critical question. Maybe the relationship genuinely is not safe for honesty, or maybe the person has never given you the chance to show them that it could be. The second category is relational lying, lying to maintain connection. People lie to their partners about things that feel threatening to the relationship. They lie to their friends about how they really feel. They lie to their families about who they actually are. Because the truth, or what they believe to be the truth about themselves, feels incompatible with the love and belonging they desperately need. This is often the most heartbreaking category, because it comes not from malice or indifference, but from fear. The fear that being fully known means being fully rejected. The desperate, aching belief that the only way to stay inside the circle of love is to hide the parts of yourself that you believe would get you thrown out of it. Has someone ever lied to you not to hurt you, but because they were terrified of losing you? Can you feel the difference between that and the other kinds of deception we have discussed? It does not make the lie okay. It does not erase the damage, but it changes the landscape of what is possible between you and that person if you both have the courage to look at what is really happening. What relational lying tells you is that the person does not feel safe enough to be fully known by you. And that lack of safety, that fear of rejection, is something worth exploring. Because sometimes the responsibility for it lies with them. Sometimes it lies with you. And sometimes it lives in the space between, in the unspoken rules and unexamined assumptions that govern what is allowed to be true in your relationship. The third category is predatory lying, lying to take something from you. And this is the category that has no ambiguity and no redemptive angle. The person who lies to gain your trust in order to exploit it, who constructs a false reality in order to extract your money, your affection, your labor, your compliance, or your vulnerability. This is deception as violation, and what it tells you about the relationship is that you are not in a relationship. You are in a transaction where you are the resource being harvested. Predatory lying does not respond to compassion. It does not respond to understanding. It does not respond to the creation of safer spaces or deeper acceptance. It responds to one thing only: distance. Because its motivation is not fear or love or self-protection in any form that genuine human connection can address. It is appetite. And appetite without conscience does not soften in the presence of kindness. It feeds. Knowing which category you are dealing with matters enormously, because it shapes what the right response is. Protective lying might respond to the creation of a safer environment where truth feels survivable. Relational lying might respond to the deepening of genuine acceptance and unconditional regard. Predatory lying responds to nothing you can give, only to the boundary you are willing to draw. And here is the final truth, the one I want to leave you with, the one that ties everything together. A life built on deception is a life of profound isolation. The liar, whatever they gain through their dishonesty, pays for it with the possibility of genuine connection. Because genuine connection requires being known, truly, fully, completely known. And the person who cannot allow themselves to be known, who is constantly managing a constructed reality, who is always performing rather than simply being, that person cannot access the one thing that makes all the power and protection and advantage of successful deception ultimately meaningless. The experience of being seen, completely seen, and loved anyway. Understanding the psychology of deception is, at its deepest level, understanding the psychology of human fear. Fear of consequences, fear of rejection, fear of inadequacy, fear of what would happen if the whole, unedited, unmanaged truth were known. And while that understanding does not excuse the damage that lies cause, it offers something that anger alone cannot. It offers the possibility of compassion alongside clarity, the ability to see the lie for what it is, name it without cruelty, protect yourself without losing your humanity, and hold on to the understanding that the person who cannot tell you the truth is, at some level, a person who has not yet learned how to be safe in this world. That knowledge does not make you responsible for fixing them, but it makes you something more than a victim. It makes you someone who understands. And in the realm of human psychology, understanding is not just knowledge. It is power. It is freedom. And it is the beginning of every relationship that is truly, deeply, unshakably real. Thank you for walking this road with me. I hope what you have learned here does not make you more suspicious. I hope it makes you more clear, more grounded, more compassionate, and far, far harder to deceive. Take care of yourself. Trust your gut. Ask the right questions. And never, ever be afraid of the silence.